Hi everyone, I hope you're having a great week. I wanted to submit a quick video going through the study guide for exam one. Your exam is on Friday, October 7th, and it starts at 7 a.m. and ends at 11:55 p.m. And before you start freaking out, no, it's not an all-day test. What that means is that the assignment essentially opens at 7 a.m. and you have all day to complete it. When you sit down to do the exam, make sure that you sit in a quiet testing space where you are not distracted and not collaborating with others. It is important that when you sit down that you take this test in one sitting. Some people have tried to exit in and out of the test and that doesn't work. You have a 2-hour time limit in one sitting to complete the virtual exam. It says to read through chapters 1 through 6 to make sure to pay attention to the tables and figures. If you do not have your textbook, it's not necessarily a requirement, so do not freak out. But if you don't have your textbook, please spend time with the PowerPoints that you can find on the syllabus tab on mywartburg.edu. First, in chapter 1, we talked about the characteristics of life. We talked about what makes something different between you, a living person, and a rock that's sitting outside in the landscaping. Make sure that you can distinguish the characteristics of life. Be sure to describe how life is organized, all the way down from the smallest particles of an atom to how things are related in a biosphere, and what does each level entail. You also should know a little bit about the scientific method. Now, I know this is a little bit outdated, but make sure you describe each step. What challenges are facing science today? I know for a fact that there'll be a question on the test that will ask you, what is a scientific problem that is facing our society today? And if you answer it in 1 to 2 sentences, you will get 1 to 2 points out of 10 points on that question. I'm looking for detail. I'm looking for explanation. Why is it a scientific problem? So is it biodiversity and habitat, emerging and re-emerging diseases, or climate change? And could you describe a couple of those and why it's a challenge that we are faced with today? Could you also describe some action steps that allow us to maybe accomplish or start to face some of those scientific challenges? In chapter 2, it was a lot about chemistry, elements, atoms, atomic number, etc. What are elements and what are atoms? If you do not know those yet, I would make sure to review by going through the chapter 2 PowerPoint as well as the chapter 2 lecture. I want to know how many elements occur naturally. You could look that up on a periodic table or something online. How is a periodic table organized in rows and in columns? Could you tell me the difference between ionic versus covalent bonding and what are examples of each? What are the properties of water? We had a question like this on one of our assignments. Could you give me an example of what hydrogen bond is? Acids and bases in figure 2.10 and the pH scale. How do we measure acids and bases? What are some examples of an acid and a base? What are the 4 macromolecules? We have carbs, lipids, and proteins, as well as nucleic acids. But for this example, carbs are made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Monosaccharides, meaning one simple complex sugar, versus disaccharide, which is 2, and polysaccharides, which are more than 3. Lipids are made up of triglycerides. They're either fats or oils. Fats are solid at room temperature. Oils are plant-based and liquid at room temperature. Phospholipids and triglycerides are important structures in the lipids category, and make sure that you know what they are and where they are found. The structure, as well as the hydrophilic and hydrophobic tails of the phospholipid bilayer. Last but certainly not least, we have proteins in the macromolecule column. What are proteins important for? What are the 4 components of their level of organization? And what does that look like? So we're talking about primary, secondary, tertiary, and quaternary structures. And why is it important that they are organized in this way? In chapter 3, we talk about what is a cell, what is the cell theory, why is it important that a cell is small versus large? Why are we made up of many small cells versus one just big, large living cell? I'll tell you that part of it is how we can efficiently take in nutrients and excess waste quickly through small cells as opposed to one large, big cell. We want to know how cells are organized, what is important about the mitochondria, and what substance makes up the mitochondria. How about the evolution of eukaryotic cells? How did we start from prokaryotic cells? What is bulk transport? How things cross the plasma membrane and describe. So how things cross the plasma membrane and describe, you could insert this as diffusion, osmosis, active transport, facilitated transport. Understand what metabolism is, what is important about the mitochondria, and cellular respiration. I know that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. It's important for creating ATP. We do that through cellular respiration, through steps called glycolysis, citric acid cycle, and electron transport chain. In chapter 4, we talk about what the 4 types of tissues are. Could you describe why each is important and where they can be found? So we have epithelial, connective, muscle, and nervous. Which type of tissue covers the body's surfaces and lines the body's cavities? That would be epithelial tissue. What are neurons? Could you understand the picture in figure 4.6 of the book? You can also find it in the PowerPoint on the syllabus slide. What are the parts and what do they do? Could you draw a neuron? Negative versus positive feedback. What is homeostasis? Homeostasis is the ability of our bodies to maintain a relatively constant internal environment. A best example of this is I can give is body temperature. So our bodies can regulate if we are too hot or too cold based on maybe what we're wearing, but also through our skin. So thinking of like shivering and goosebumps versus sweating and maybe a little flushed. Our body can maintain homeostasis through other things like blood pressure, as well as water and electrolyte balance. What are some of the organ systems and their jobs in this? So some of the organ systems that may involve with homeostasis, first of all, is all of them, but the nervous system can control the negative versus positive feedback, as well as things like the urinary system, cardiovascular system, respiratory system are all constantly going through homeostasis. Finally, what are the regions of the skin? We have the epidermis, the dermis, and the hypodermis, also known as the subcutaneous layer. Chapter 5, what is the cardiovascular system? It's our system using the heart and blood vessels that pumps nutrients, oxygen, carbon dioxide, and waste throughout our body. The functions are to maintain a relatively constant internal environment through the cardiovascular system, making the oxygen that is carried through our blood system to our extremities, blood to our brain, feet, arms, legs, all the things. What is the anatomy of the heart? Blood vessels such as veins and arteries. Could you tell me where the aorta is? Could you tell me where the right atrium is? What's the anatomy of the heart? How is the heartbeat regulated? What is blood pressure? You've probably had your blood pressure taken before. What is the largest artery in the body? And explain the structure versus function relationship. Why is the largest artery have a specific structure that it does, and how does it correlate to that function? What is an electrocardiogram? What does it do, and why is it important? What are some common cardiovascular diseases, and how might you prevent them? How does blood flow through the heart? Can you trace the pathway of the blood? If you've made it to this point in the video, hopefully that you're going to get this little nugget, but I will have you identify the path of which the blood moves through the heart, making sure that you list all those steps and then why it's important that we understand those steps. Chapter 6, what makes blood red in color? How do we determine blood type? What are the functions of the blood? What is blood made of? And how does Rh factor affect pregnancy? As always, feel free to email me if you have questions. I know it can be a little challenging to take an exam online, but I hope that you guys find ease in the fact that you can find the study guide as well as this video to help guide your studying. As always, it's not the end-all be-all, and it's not limited to these topics, but I do agree that if you study the study guide, that you will do well on this test. Let me know if you have questions and email me if you have any.